Yeah.
Ah,
Look
it's
at
better now. We have to turn it off
it
completely.
fixed
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah. I didn't know
Yeah,
doing it.
you did. Absolutely. Magic. Hey guys. Hey, front row seat. Shall we?
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome. We'll see, kind of looking across the audience who I know and don't know, and we welcome you all this evening. My name is Steve Sims. I'm with the Ecology Advisory Board. We're an advisory board to our town board on most things, all things ecological. And so we were established back in 2014, right around the flood time. We wanted like a more natural restoration on the river coming through our community. And so there was a lot of effort at that time to try to come up with a design that was more nature based instead of kind of hardscaped or a lot of cement and so forth. But there's also a balance with the eco. I should stand in front of this camera, shouldn't I? Are you recording right now? Sorry. Okay, I'll stand in front of the camera. We are live too. Well, not fully live. We're just recording. So, um, for people to watch later. But basically, with the river, uh, there's a balance between the ecology and also with the economics of our community, the kayak courses and the recreation. So there's a lot of mix between those two forces working together in the community. With the Ecology Advisory Board is our motto or is to advocate for the protection of ecological integrity and the aquatic and terrestrial natural resources of the town of Lyons and its surrounding areas to support a dynamic and resilient ecosystem, a quality environment for all, and a vibrant economy. So we want to try to balance all those factors working together. Um, part of the role of the ecology board is to reach out to the community along with our ecological interests. And so an evening like tonight is a community outreach. We do another one that started many years ago with the K through 12 um, and science programs. And so it was great. As you started in this room, and three or four young students would come up here on stage and do their presentation on ecological topics. And it's growing over with the principals of the schools. It's grown to now a great event. It's coming up here Thursday, yeah, the April 30th, and it's at the high school, middle senior high school, and you watch K through 12 students who have worked on their projects over the last school year present them from a scientific, and it gives them a chance to speak the language of science, and to present to people and to become comfortable in front of people. So it's a great event if you can make it. Um, so this is in combination with the Sustainable Futures Committee, another aspect to the town for um, advocacy of more sustainable energy and so forth. Um, Along with this community outreach, today we have this presentation with Dr. Johnny Thomas, and we are grateful to have you here. Um, your interest started in the EAB about a year ago. Yeah. And it wasn't too far after that, all of a sudden you were a board member and you were on the board. And Tegan is here in our audience. She's the chairwoman for our board. So they were working together and it brought that kind of brought new members into the board and a little bit of different energy and new energy. So um, I call you Johnny, but I'll call you Dr. Thomas tonight. That's good. You hold a bachelor's degree in electrical and computer engineering from the University of California, Santa Barbara. I had to look up some of this. Then you went and did a master's degree in electrical engineering from Georgia Institute of Tech. I got that right. Okay. And that's, and I don't know the years on this, but then you went on for your MBA with honors from Santa Clara University. Okay. And then just kind of recently in 2017, you is where you did your PhD in civil, environmental, and sustainable engineering from the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment at Arizona State University in Tempe. Kind of It's amazing because I mean I met you in a whole different light, and then when I read what you have, it's really you've connected a lot of dots and what you've brought it forward today. I'll read a little part of a bio that I saw. One of your areas of focus is understanding how humans interact and depend on complex technical systems amid natural man-made disasters and catastrophic system failures. And so you are now a co-founder of the executive director of Resilience Engineering Institute. Is that through CU?
No.
Okay, that's a separate entity. Okay. But your professorship at CU probably brings some of that in. So Johnny, Dr. Thomas, we welcome you this evening and we look forward to hearing what you have to talk about. A nice round for Johnny. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's really an honor to be here tonight. To be here with community, with friends and neighbors and students, even. It's really wonderful. And what Steve mentioned was that I look at natural disasters, man-made disasters and events, and oftentimes we think of those in terms of something that, something blows up or something floods or something burns, like a quick event. Climate change is very different. It is a slow-moving disaster. It's one that if you're watching, you may not even notice it, but it's happening over a period of time. So that's what we're going to focus on here tonight. And I'm going to take a little bit of, being outside of the classroom, and I get to stretch a little bit. I don't have to follow the prescription I would maybe in the classroom. So, a lot of the information about climate change, frankly, it's available. There's so much out there, what to do and how to live a greener life and some of the benefits and all of this. And so I'm not going to list information for you, although I do have plenty of it. And in fact, at the end, I've got some handouts, digital handouts. I've got ton of resources for you that are anyone that's interested in digging deeper. But really, my objective tonight is to invite you to take a new perspective, maybe to expand the perspective that you already have, and to spark your curiosity a little bit, and maybe shake you up a little bit. I want you to feel something, not just hear information. So I will go through and I want to, like a good academic, always try to identify things. So I want to be really clear what we're talking about. So we'll just kind of jump in. And the very first thing is just when we talk about climate, what is climate? What is the difference between climate and weather, for example? Well, when we think about weather, we're thinking about short term, what's happening on a day-to-day basis. Okay. On the other hand, when we're thinking about climate, we're thinking about long time scales, big time scales, okay, over a period of time. So where we may, and looking at the weather, say, look outside, it's going to rain, or what's the temperature, what's the humidity. When we're thinking about climate, we're looking at things like typical temperature over a period of time, average snowfall or snowpack, and how it may be impacting trend-wise across seasons. So wind and humidity, frequency, but also extreme events like extreme weather that occasionally occurs. And so in general, weather is kind of, what's happening right now, what's it like outside, what's it going to be like tomorrow. And when we're thinking about climate, we're thinking about trends and patterns over an extended period of time. So that's one word, climate. Now, the next word we're looking at here is change. Well, that kind of explains itself, but recognizing that across these broad scope of time, that there's changes in patterns, changes in trends, and some of those changes have consequences that we may not even recognize until far later than when they're actually observed. That's what we call long tail impact and cross-cascading impacts. that something happens here, but just like when you take a water hose and you whip it and it wiggles all the way down and on the other end, climate change is one of those phenomena that an event here can give rise to something over here at a later time. You didn't realize it, the connection, the way things were there. So I want us to think about that a little bit. And this is just a scramble of words to just spark your curiosity a little bit to recognize, what climate change is about and what all of the different elements, the considerations, the kind of things that we think about and talk about when we're talking about climate change. So, so that's just a little prelude, okay, just to be clear, what is climate change? But the next obvious question is, what is resilience? Because we're going to talk about climate change resilience, okay? Resilience. Now, a lot of folks have a relatively common, sort of very fundamental understanding of resilience, and us resilient scholars kind of cringe when we hear this, but oh, it bounced back. Oh, okay. That's a little piece of it. It's actually far more complex than that. One of the things to recognize, I'll get a little geeky on you here for just a minute, but the National Academy of Sciences describes or defines resilience according to 4 sequential time frames. And plan and prepare, absorb, recover, and adapt. Okay, plan and prepare as in, well, we can see something coming or we're aware of something, so we do something about it. Okay, but the impact happens. What is the capacity to actually take it? Well, we nail the windows down so the hurt, things don't blow away. We make adjustments to absorb the impact without completely destroying our scenario. Now, in a resilience setting, we wouldn't, what the notion of recover or bouncing back is kind of oversimplification. What we're really looking for is an adjustment to another level of functioning that is different from what it was before, but is still viable and acceptable. And so in that adjustment, then eventually we have a recovery period. Okay, the wind is gone. We're going to clean up the mess, but we've got a setting. We've had to make some changes. And then comes a period of adaptation, which is, you know what? This thing is going to be with us for a while. And it's not like we can just say, oh, well, the storm is gone and it's over, but we actually have to make changes in the way that we interact with our environment, changes in the way that we do the things that we do. So across these different time frames, and one of the reasons I like to highlight this from the National Academy of Sciences is it's used in all of the government documentation, most of the government-sponsored research around resilience has some kind of reference to this. Now, I've added a lot of detail on the diagram here, but you can see that the recovery period, you may get back to a viable level of operation, which is kind of that gray zone, but you may not. But there's actually also a condition of post-traumatic growth, which is the notion that after an event, somehow the community, the environment, the setting comes back stronger. And generally, we think in those settings, there's feedback loop of learning, the capacity to absorb, retain, and access knowledge from an event and then utilize it to prevent future opportunities. So just kind of a perspective on resilience from the National Academy of Sciences. And then some of us scholars go and we use a definition. And what is really clear, and well, it's clear for those of us who work here, but for those that aren't familiar, resilience is actually a verb. Okay, it's not a noun, it's a verb. It's a dynamic process. So what we're looking at is, and this is, some authors suggest that if these 4 components are present, sensing, anticipating, adapting, and learning, then we have a resilient scenario, resilient setting. And we could think of that sensing as in I'm aware of what's going on, anticipating, I expect, I'm looking, I'm alert. adapting, and meaning I'm making adjustments in real time sometimes, and then learning. I'm absorbing information, sometimes dynamically learning as things are happening, but always integrating knowledge after an experience such that in future scenarios, there's a continuous kind of growth process that's going on. So sensing, anticipating, adapting, and learning. That's kind of the drawing of what it looks like. And then, our word scramble here on resilience. So, there's a lot of different perspectives on it. And one of the challenges with talking about resilience is virtually every knowledge group at a university, whether it's physics or biology or engineering or psychology, all have their silo of publications around the topic of resilience. And currently, there's no linking underlying framework or knowledge base that they share. So they pepper each other, and like academics do, and write papers to discount someone else's work and say, no, this is the way it is, and argue over what the definition is. But that's the emergent nature of resilience. In fact, those of you familiar with sustainability, I liken where resilience is right now, at least in academia and certainly in practice, is sort of where sustainability was maybe 12, 15 years ago. It's emergent. 12, 15 years ago, we didn't have degrees in sustainability. Now we do. A wide range of master degrees. To my knowledge, there's still only 2 universities in the country offering doctoral degrees in sustainable engineering. I went to one of them. But there's almost nothing in resilience. There's an occasional course here and there, but it hasn't really risen to that state yet. But it's coming. Folks like myself are working on that. So with a little bit of a setting there, we know what climate is, we know what climate change is. We have a general idea of what resilience is about. Why does it matter? Why should we be thinking about this? What's the big deal? Well, it's because of this. And we've only got one of these that we know of right now. There's no planet B. We don't have an option about what to do next. And for those of us who look at these kind of things and think about them and recognize them on a regular basis, it's like a tsunami that's coming that, frankly, many are just unaware of. Even those who care and have at least a concern maybe don't have the full depth of understanding of the impact that we may be facing. So I will invite you to just feel a little bit uncomfortable with some of the things that I share with you tonight, because that's part of what wakes us up to what the realities are that we're facing, is a little bit of shock therapy occasionally. So here's one. Now, this is what's incredible is that we've actually, when I say we, scholars, people who write about these things and publish, have actually known about this first publications were in the early 70s. And scientists that have been studying the ice cores have been able to track and map through, way back in time and see the patterns of increase in CO2 over extended periods of time. And so this is not new news. But when we look in the upper right-hand corner there, you see that right around 1911 or so, the Industrial Revolution came along. Suddenly, big spike. And then look at 1958, and then where we're at today. I mean, it's never been like this before. We have no record looking back in time, and let's see, that goes back 800,000 years. Okay, well, it's a little ways, but from what scientists are able to study from the ice cores, there's no evidence that the CO2 has ever risen to these levels before. And then this radical spike that we're experiencing. And then there are other things. about why it matters. Looking at this, scientists refer to this as the Doomsday Glacier. I always have trouble with pronouncing this. Yeah, the Wallaties Glacier, but it's about the size of Florida. And it's retreated nearly 9 miles, have melted, and just since in the last few years. And what we're seeing is that if this glacier were to break away, and it's being tracked, and there's massive cracks and continuous melting that's happening even now, that sea level would rise approximately 2 feet. Now, think about what 2 feet of sea level would do on a global scale. Goodbye, Florida. You know, coastal regions, there would be huge, huge impacts. We would see climate migrants. We already see that. But people that are displaced from their homes and their living because of the rising seas. And this is something that is very real and it's very slow and happening. And every once in a while, you see a report or you read something, but you know, this is not like the evening news. So most people aren't aware of this. This sort of this impending potential disaster scenario. Okay, let's look at another one. So the Western snowpack. So this is some data that shows the difference according to the median over, let's see, what does it say? The last century. And the variation, okay? So if we look at how temperatures have changed from 5 to 10 degrees across the last 20th century and start looking at some of these variables. So here's 2015, and it was actually fairly small there, not a lot of water in the snowpack. And there is 2023, and let me see if I can get rid of that thing up there. There we go. Now, here's the shocker. Oops. That's year to date, right here in the Western US. The lowest it's been in nearly 40 years since they started tracking this information in 1987. Now, we all know it's been an incredibly dry winter. We've had very little rain. And this is just evidence. This is recent data. The data was, I think, right up to April 1st. So it's become a regular measure on a yearly basis that these measures are made, and they're made all across Western US. Okay, each one of these red dots is a measure of snowpack. And what this is showing us is that across the entire century, from the percent equivalent from 1991 to 2020. Okay, and I lost my clicker again. What we see is that up here in this region, Pacific Northwest, there's maybe a little closer to normal. You see some green up in here, but it's mostly in high elevations. All through California, and this is kind of the circle there is Colorado, is all red. And what that's saying is that less than 50%, the snowpack is less than 50% of what the average was across this time frame from 1991 to 2020. That's alarming. I mean, that's like, it's just stopped raining. And we'll talk more about what that means, the implications of snowpack, but the short story is it's a reference to the available water that you can anticipate having for the rest of the year. So it's very concerning. And that's mostly in the lower elevations. So here's another one. This is showing temperatures, and this one actually looks across, if I'm right, yeah, 1901 to 2000. Okay, if you measure the temperature across the US between over the last 100 years and then reference the temperature, the median temperature today compared to the median temperature across the past 100 years, it's 50%, nearly 50% higher than what it was. Whoops. Yeah, there. Higher than what it was. So there's a little scale down here in the bottom, but that's shocking. You know, if you just think about over across 100 years and that the temperature, the median temperature is nearly 50% higher. I mean, that's just, yeah, it's very disturbing. So what does that lead to? What are the implications? Back to the question, why should we care? Well, what happens when the natural environment collides with the built environment? And this happened right here in our own backyard just a couple of years ago, the Marshall Fire. And as someone who studies these kinds of events and writes about them and talks about them, I was shocked. I mean, the fires are something that happens in the hill, up in the hills. And every once in a while, there'd be a little evacuation somewhere, but never to this level of devastation. You know, over 1,000 homes burned in the region. Again, shocking, absolutely shocking. So these are the extreme things, right? Some of the things that we recognize that can and do happen. And the scenario, I mean, basically, just thinking on some of that data we looked at before, you can imagine we're heading into a very tender fire season this year with the low snowpack and this, you know, the lack of rain that we've seen. So let's look a little bit more into the Front Range, some of the things across the Front Range that we've seen. So defining snowpack levels, basically the numbers is it's down about 50%, roughly 50% of what it normally is across the region. And of course, that leads to intensified drought. And this is where the cascade begins, right? No water, a lot of drought, and then what's that lead to? Potential for increased wildfires. Okay, so, you know, we're already pretty vigilant, but this really invites us to just be incredibly mindful this going into the season here about, you know, seeing smoke, about what might happen, and being very careful in how we're doing the things that we do to avoid those kind of situations. And that impacts ecosystems and communities, right? Again, the cascade into agriculture, the quality of water that you have access to, air, the quality of air we're breathing, even the soil that is exposed can be damaged. So, and these things build with time. It's not like it's just, oh, it was a season and it went away, but the impact was there. The impact lingers, and then it can build upon it. So some of the changing snowpack patterns. So the historic lows, again, dropped about 52%. But it's really impacted on the water resources in terms of decreasing the amount of water that's available. So the watersheds are going to be lower, they're going to be impacted. And we're going to be dealing with that situation. And in addition, well, I already mentioned that, the drought and the wildfire. So what it invites is a mindset of adaptation and conservation. Okay, how do we potentially change our behaviors? Or what I'm going to suggest, it's far more than changing our behaviors. It's changing our mindset. It's changing the way that we think about how we live and the things that we do, and how we relate with those others who, it's very unfortunate to recognize that for many people, climate change is a belief system, not a scientific evidence. how do we deal with that? When we have an administration that doesn't support these concerns or these considerations, how do we deal with that? Well, what I'll suggest, and not to go off topic here, but it isn't by condemning and pushing away. It's by inviting and pulling in and striving to understand. Because once we are able to try to understand someone who is not able to have that perspective, then perhaps we can help them begin to understand our perspective. Communication is critical, and the divide just gets sharper if we have the push-pull scenario. So I know it's hard to hold that, but that's just for what it's worth. That's my perspective on that. So there's a number of concerns about wildfires and the extreme heat as well. And that's something else that we face when it gets incredibly hot. And if you have the scenario where we're low on water and it's incredibly hot, it's like a double whammy. And suddenly, we're facing fire. So the concern with fire comes from multiple angles. It's not just one thing, it's the combination of things. It's the proverbial perfect storm of the setting for what could happen. And and so for communities that threatens property, again, drinking water, health, all these different things that come to mind. And if we think about what kind of community measures could we take, well, mitigation zones, some of the things that we're familiar with, planning, being prepared, and being able in a position to address these kind of concerns, monitoring. That's we think back to sensing, anticipating, adapting. That's sensing, being aware of what is the scenario, being very clear of what's happening, and coordinating amongst ourselves, amongst the resources that we have available, and being in a position to respond in a timely manner when things do happen. Now, this might be a good place to distinguish between what we might think of as mitigation and resilience. Okay. Mitigation says, okay, what can I do? How might I change my behavior? What can I, as an individual or group, in order to make things different so that this doesn't happen? So these kinds of things don't happen. How can I mitigate the potential negative scenario? On the other hand, resilience says, this is the way it is. How do I adapt? And what we want is a healthy mix of both of these things. We need to be able to mitigate against the potential for bad things happening. But this, as we saw on the chart earlier on, this has been going on for a long, long time. It's not like we're all just going to be able to flip a switch and suddenly it's going to go away. There's an adjustment. There's an adaptation process, and learning to work with and to mitigate side by side is critical. So, okay, so that's kind of some of the settings. What can we actually do about it? There's this very well intended thought, and I'm going to come back to this, but save the planet. Save the planet, poor planet. I had a professor sit me down at Arizona State. He said, son, you don't need to worry about saving the planet. The planet's going to be fine. You need to save yourself. And that's one of the sharp realities. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't care and that you don't take steps to be mindful and so forth, but to be focused on the notion that we're somehow saving the planet is a little misleading. So we'll say a little bit more about that as we go along. But what are some community examples of resilience and how we might form partnerships and address things? Well, watershed restoration. So whether it's cleanup and being able to have the ability to forecast and sharing information and knowledge, that's certainly something. Organizations like Firewise, supports community efforts toward addressing how neighborhoods are organizing amongst themselves to be better prepared. The sustainable landscaping, something really simple. So minimize the amount of water that you actually need and those kinds of things. And then if we look at the local and state and government level, um, so locally, we need funding to be able to put programs into place to do things, okay, to organize in a way that we can operate and be better prepared to deal with these kinds of scenarios. At the state level, well, Colorado's actually ahead of the game. There's a lot of really good programs in Colorado addressing climate change and climate related issues across a wide range of different topics. And at the federal level, frankly, things are a little scrambled right now. It's sad but true. Um, there's discontinuity between strategic initiatives and resources. Things are spread out. There's no underlying linkage tying it together, and we frankly don't have an administration that supports even the causal nature of this. And that's where we realize the difference between looking at something based on evidence, based on measurements, data, versus something that's based on belief. I believe or I don't believe. I believe in the tooth fairy, you know. But this is the mindset that we're dealing with. And what I want to appeal to you in thinking about this is absurd as it sounds, is to try not to get dismissive. Try to understand that if you could get inside of the head of someone who believes this or doesn't believe that, in their world, in their perspective, that's true for them. So how do we reframe? How do we get in there and make that adjustment? And it's a challenge. It's also an invitation. But the point being that it isn't going to happen through confrontation or through logic or reason. It's not rational. It's not a rational conversation. You ever had a conversation with someone who just doesn't believe? My sister in Indiana, she doesn't believe. She doesn't believe it. Like, what? How do you approach that? So that's the issues on the federal level. So some of the practical steps we could think about, water conservation at home, different ways to be able to preserve. So these are some of the things that we could do. Energy efficiency improvements. These are, again, some of the things that we're very familiar with, and there's lots of programs and resources and incentives in place to support these kinds of things. And also being prepared, simply taking steps to minimize the potential for fire hazards and those kind of things, and also being ready to run. And whatever that means, having your essential items packed and nearby, and so it's not entirely a surprise if suddenly you get an evacuation notice. So there are steps to take that, and this is probably in the resilience category. Okay, we're adapting. Hey, we're in this scenario. This is the way it is. This is what's happening. How do we behave? How do we act? What do we do in a way that minimizes our losses, preserves as much as possible life, and taking steps to try to mitigate where we can, as we can. So other community actions. So watershed cleanups, restoration, lots of cool programs. Occasionally they happen right here. Some of them were sponsored. I think even the environment, I think our group has sponsored that once or twice, and probably the sustainability group as well. So regenerative agriculture is another. So how can we support these kind of programs to boost food security? And there's lots of different ways to approach that. There's a lot of cool programs there as well. And neighborhood networks, activities, things like this, education. I'm an educator. I really, I mean, that's kind of my thing. And I just believe through and through that one of the base things, even for those non-believers, eventually education, learning that if that could happen would potentially make a shift. And so holding out for that to be a possibility. And in public policy, civic participation, advocacy, the different things we could do, getting involved with programs, participating, whether it's town meetings like this or workshops, there's going to be a lot of really interesting things going on this week here in town. Try to step out, learn something, stretch a little bit, especially those things maybe that you're not as familiar with. State level advocacy, policies, mitigation, and there's actually a lot of very interesting programs and supported programs happening at the state level. Regional collaboration between partners and organizations as well, and utilizing some of the federal programs to the extent that we can, right? There's a lot of good research that still they haven't taken it all down yet. Some of the reports are still up and they're very well done. But sadly, it's kind of a mixed bag. There are programs like the FEMA CRS program, a community rating system. It's something we're going to be looking at a little bit closer here. And it is a type of rating system that would offer a discount on flood insurance based on certain actions and things done within the community. So that's just an example on a community level, how we may be able to benefit from a federal program to get local benefits. Some of the economic drivers, this is kind of surprising or maybe shocking. Since 1980, in the US, we've suffered something over 400 what is classified as disasters, costing just under $3 trillion. Okay, I can't even really cognize those numbers of, trillions. Billions is enough, but trillions, um, big losses, huge losses. And how might we be proactive in regard to adapting? What are the things that we could do to address the potential of long-term impacts and cost and to gain stability within the community and climate governance? Thinking about how we manage the programs and the resources that are available so that there's an equitable distribution of access in the community. And then multi-level coordination for climate resilience. And multi-level meaning that all different levels of state and community and federal and programs, and some are private programs, and there are occasional grants and that type of thing. But trying to really utilize those resources in a way that they provide local support. And it's an opportunity as well to build community in the process. So developing a strategy, which that's unfortunate, what is really missing at the federal level is we don't have a resilience strategy. It's been left to the states to develop for themselves. And so we have a lack of coherence among what to do or how best to do it or what resources may be available to address these things. So that's an issue that we're dealing with as well. So I've given you kind of an overview. Okay, we talked about some of the difficult things, some of the potential things we could do, what the scenario is. But now I want to get just a little bit academic on you, if you just entertain me, and suggest that what I invite you to do is to think differently. And thinking differently is essentially looking at our environment as a collection or an ensemble of systems. Systems. Now, a system in a simple language is a collection of things that have relationships among those things. Okay. And when there's no relationship, it's just a pile of stuff. But if I got a collection of things that have a relationship among them, now we're talking about a system. And then we have complex systems. Complex, there's a difference between complex and complicated. Complicated is, well, there's a lot of pieces and a lot of things that go together. And complex is back to the, oh my gosh, and they all have this relationship, this that is intimate and interacting. And suddenly things, begin to escalate into in complexity and understanding. But in a larger sense, and you've been looking at this diagram here on most of my slides, and a variation of it here. But what we scientists and engineers, we characterize in a general sense, suggesting that in this world out here, we have social systems. We are right now a social system sitting here. Our town is a social system. And then we have environmental systems, which we are embedded within this environment and the climate and the region that we're in. And we have technical systems. I'm using technology right here to deliver this talk and how we're recording. So social, ecological, and technological systems, all interacting with one another in a very complex way. And they any one that breaks down can have impact on the others. Okay, so climate change is just not all about the climate. When the climate goes wacky, the technology may go down. The technology goes down. What about the hospital that needs electricity and our precious internet connection? Think of all the things that cascade when that happens. So when we think about social systems, technological systems, and ecological systems, recognize that we're really looking at how these things are interacting with one another to actually deliver the quality of life that we experience. We most of the time we're just, it's not, we just don't think about it until the internet's out or the water. You go to turn your water on and there's no water. Now just do a mental experiment for a moment and just imagine if you went to your faucet and there was no water. Okay. An hour, still no water. 6 hours, no water. A day, 3 days, a week. Imagine a month with no water. What would your life be like? 6 months. This is radical. I mean, you would change. Suddenly, your entire focus gets redirected. And these are the kinds of disruptions, the kinds of potential disruptions that we're up against. So, anybody familiar with panarchy? There's a book on panarchy. It's a sustainability nerdy book, but a really good one. Anyway, the authors there suggest that whenever people are in the loop, or what we scientists sometimes say, when there's a human in the loop, and the people are involved in the scenario. I'm not just studying technology or studying the environment. I'm studying people interacting with technology, people interacting with the environment. It's no longer just a function of space and time because humans assign meaning to things. So we have to interpret and recognize that each of us see the world in a particular way through our lens, and we assign meaning to our experiences and to the things that we encounter. And so we have to take that into consideration because we all have a mental model, right? We carry around a mental model of the way the world is, the way life is. And we get confused or upset when suddenly what's happening here doesn't match. I don't have a mental model to match with this. What do? I dismiss it. I create a new model, or I just deny it, or I get curious. So the scenario we face is I may see red and you might see blue. Or back to our friends who are based on belief systems they have a preconceived notion of what they're looking at, and they see something like this. But someone else might see something different, entirely different, a complex scenario. And so how do we address the collective assumptions and at individual level, at organizational level, and the way that we interpret information and respond to the scenario that we're facing with coherence, with rationality, with resource? These are the challenges that we're facing. So climate change kind of invites transformation. How are we doing on time? We're doing good. All right. How is this? Is this okay? We doing all right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here's a couple of things. 6 dimensions of societal change. When we think about the impact of climate and how we function and behave and how we live our lives, what might we do different? How might we sort of look into that scenario and try to understand, where might the impacts be and how might we potentially make adjustments? Okay. We can think about the economy, how it's interconnected with global supply chains and the financial systems. And how do we make that resilient? Well, if we could be thinking towards long-term productivity, and basically, even just to stop right there, long term. Now, most of us, we humans are funny. Our scope of time, our perception and our dimension of time is typically maybe 1 or 2 generations. It's really not very long, unless we're a history major or we're reading history. But think about it. Anybody got grandkids? Yeah, I just got my first one. All right, so think about it. But we think about grandchildren, maybe our great grandchildren, but great great grandchildren, and pretty quickly it tapers off. Even historically, looking into the past or looking into the future. And what sustainability invites us to do is to think far in time to a period when we're not even here to experience what happens. But how do we, as a human, bring our care and compassion to a time period that we're not even going to be here? It's the proverbial, well, out of sight, out of mind. Why should I worry about it? In 500 years, I'm not going to be here. But like I do with my students sometimes, I invite them to, okay, I want you to take your attention, 500 years into the future and turn around and look back and imagine what you would see. And if you know what you knew now, how would you explain? If you had the opportunity to explain, what would you say? Oops, sorry, I should have known better. I wish I'd have done it different. If only. But those are the kind of things that we need to begin to extend our perception to include these broader timescales and these implications that go beyond our life. Because we're in a short little window, relatively speaking, and many of the impacts, the worst impacts, may not come until after we're not here. But does that mean that we shouldn't be involved? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So another, food, monoculture. How might we think about, farming to raise one, principal thing at a time and healthy foods? And how do we localize production and the organic methods? Energy, increase in energy costs and emissions associated with that. And how do we distribute renewable energy systems? How do we make those available? And urbanization, efficiency in urban structures, some of the hot spots, a lot of the concrete islands that absorb a lot of heat. And how do we address that? How do we deal with it? How do we begin to think about it? Well, flexible use of buildings, and being able to redistribute things and redesign things. Amazingly, simply taking shading into consideration is one of the major, it sounds so simple, but it's when buildings and structures are designed, thinking about where they'll cast a shadow and what regions can actually have a huge influence on these urban heat islands and how they're designed. Human well-being in general. Um, and one of the things to recognize there is, and this was a lesson that scientists have learned is, for a long time it was thought, oh, just be more efficient. We just want to increase efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. And suddenly there was an aha moment when it was recognized that efficiency in the short term is not necessarily the same as efficiency or resilience in the long term. In fact, oftentimes the activities in the present moment that we think are efficient have negative implications in the long term that are simply not resilient and don't work for the kind of scenarios we're trying to address. So suddenly we're dealing with this tug of war in logic and scenarios, and how do we deal with that? Global environmental commons and the notion of being able to get collective knowledge and shared of information. Like I like to say to my students sometime, because I really invite collaboration and mutual support. We seldom work in isolation, right? In the real world, we tend to work together. And, and I like to say, no one is smarter than all of us when we can really bring our knowledge and our resource together towards addressing these kind of concerns versus thinking that some one person is somehow magically going to figure it out and come up and, oh, here's the answer. It's nice to have a contribution, but it's that collective knowledge that I believe has the potential to move us forward. So sustainable development, all right? What is sustainability? What does it even mean? And in simple terms, it's about ensuring that the way that we use resources today is taking consideration that there will be adequate resources available for others in the future. All right. It's a fairly simple way to break it down, but that's really what it's about. If you think back, it wasn't that long ago, and for some, maybe it's even still like this, but we're kind of a throwaway society. We buy something and it's done, you throw it away, you buy another one, and things go to the landfill and nobody's thinking about it. All of a sudden we got all this garbage, we got all this lingering toxins, and instead of repurposing, and the notion, I don't know if you're familiar or heard the term, the circular economy, meaning things move through the economy, they have a useful life cycle, but then they get repurposed, reformed into something entirely new, and they come back into the economy and they circulate through into something else. It's a different way of thinking. And it really requires being able to respond with that broader scope in mind and how we're looking at things. And the notion of sustainable development, it's kind of an extension of sustainability, which is we are building, we're growing, we're developing, we're extending over time in a way that is taken into consideration future generations so that there's adequate resource and facility for those that are going to come after us. And that's an invitation to think beyond me, myself, and I, or me and my kids, or my kids' kids, or their kids, 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 kids. How far out can you go? How far can you extend your own sense of care and compassion to really think into the future about what may be, or what may be possible? So sustainable development is there's three core pillars, and one is willingness. So being willing, but there's also the condition where we might be willing, but maybe not just understand. We may not know, right? And then another is understanding, but we may not be able to act, which is another concern. And then there's capacity, right? Wise, but unwilling. And what we're looking for is the overlap of these things, right? So that we can really be willing, wise, and able to make the appropriate actions. And so we're looking at how we combine those psychological resources in order to do the things that we do. I mean, humans have shown that we can make a difference. COVID showed us that. You know, there was a lot of good lessons that came out of the experience with COVID. Remember the video images of clear skies in China, where, you know, even now it's gone back to just, you know, sheer smog. So if we were able to make the change, we know that we could do it. What if we just stop drive? What if we just, you know, minimize the driving and just do it? Suddenly the air clears and things, you know. So, you know, we got a little snapshot, we got a little peek about what might be possible. But changing behaviors and over not just with individuals, but with groups and with cultures, it's extremely complex. It's really much more. And then there's the notion that, you know, I see red, you see blue. You know, we have different ideas on things. And we have conflicting goals. We're pulling against each other. We conceive things and perceive things in different ways. So how do we work with these scenarios? Because the science and the activities, you know, renewable energy and whatever, those things, I mean, they're kind of obvious. We can list them. This is not new information. But the human psyche and the behavior behind implementation and engagement, that's where the battle is. That's where the challenge is to address these things. So some of the initiatives, you know, simple things, again, high level, not necessarily trying to list a bunch of things, but eliminating waste in production, you know, producing benign emissions, renewable energy, resource efficient, sensitive stakeholders. All these are good things. Don't get me wrong. These are really good things. But so now I'm getting to a crescendo of something. All right. Because what I mentioned earlier was I wanted to invite you to have another perspective. All right. So here's just the beginning of another perspective. All right. This is a shot from Artemis, just recent, April 1st, I think it was. Okay. There's our little planet. They ain't making any more planets anytime soon. This is what we have to work with. Now let's really put it into perspective. So we humans are the new kids on the block. All right. Scientists have been able to determine there's been no less than 5 mass extinctions since the Earth was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. The dinosaurs ruled the Earth for nearly 165 million years. So let's put it into perspective. Homo sapiens have been here about 300,000 years. Our ancestors, from which Homo sapiens were eventually evolved from, were around about 6 million years. Again, keep in mind that dinosaurs, 160 million years. Now, if we were to imagine a time scale of 1 year and 365 days, then the dinosaurs arrived on January 1 and they left roughly around the 3rd week, about midday, the 3rd week of September. Our ancestors arrived a little after noon on December 21st. We arrived a little after noon on December 31st. We've barely been here. How could we be so arrogant as to think that we can rule the world and determine our and what is actually is now well known is that we're actually the sixth mass extinction is underway, is happening now, right before us. There's lots of data to support this. You know, the uniqueness about this mass extinction, unlike others, you know, an asteroid and volcanic and loss of oxygen, the cause now is we humans. We have disturbed the environment so bad. There's mass extinction of mammals, and some of the numbers are. Let's see, I got them here. 75%. They estimate that 75% of the species could vanish within 300 years. And what the way the extinction is happening right now is the sheer population of mammals is reducing, massive reductions in the population. And what is it? 94% of the populations of 77 mammal groups have been lost in the last century. And, you know, we don't, I mean, on a day-to-day basis, it's hard to, how do I notice that? You know, and it's information. It doesn't really, you know, make the news per se. So back to that perspective, you know, the notion that, okay, this is our planet. This is another shot from Artemis. And everybody remember Carl Sagan? He reminded us there's no sign that help is coming anytime soon. This is what we have to work with. So the notion that we want to save the planet, and yet we see the planet has gone through all these mass extinctions. It's frozen over. It's been volcanized. It's been, you know, lost its oxygen. It's come back, and it's done this multiple times. The reality, the really big picture, the planet's going to be fine. We need to think about saving ourselves because it's our species that is at risk. And that's the alarm. That is the call to action. And I hope if I leave you with anything, it is just be curious. Okay, if this is this situation, what am I going to do? What are we going to do? And when are we going to do it? We're going to wait? Or are we going to actually step up to the plate and do something and engage and be involved? So that's what I got. That's me. Thank you. I appreciate your time. And if you would like any of this, if you get the URL code in the upper left, that's the presentation, and you'll get all of the others. But I actually put together a resource. It's 4 pages of websites and links and things, local, state, and federal, what you as an individual can do and what we can 10 points and what we as a community can do. So that's up there. And then I've got a couple of websites and yeah, so thank you very much.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for your time. Does anybody have any questions for Johnny that they want to bring up or raise or comments on it? I have one, but if anybody else.
So, I don't know, probably 8 years ago or something, the question is about language around this issue. My mother-in-law said, there's no global warming. It snows here all the time. She's in the East Coast and they get obviously a lot more water. So I have noticed more recently that moving away, global warming is a cost. And that's what I tried to explain to her.
Right.
but are we getting away from certain, is there a vocabulary that we can start to use that's a little bit more helpful?
Well, that actually is a really good point. And the issue is that words are funny. After a while, they carry baggage, right? And they have legacy imprints and so forth. And a lot of the languaging that is the believers are holding on to are loaded around those kinds of things. So then I mean, I'm in a way, I'm challenged to do this around a range of different topics with my students, where there are certain things that I want to bring to their attention, but I reframe and I use a different language that they're more able to listen to and to hear. So it may be a way to address the subject without using those words. And that becomes a challenge because each person is different about what are the hot buttons for them and how do you deal with that. But I do believe that that is a really, really good point. And that is when we think about communication with the so-called non-believers, that's right where it starts, is how to have that dialogue so they don't shut down. You know, they're still in they're listening. And if they listen, maybe they'll be able to hear eventually. But it is constant reframing and addressing different language. I mean, I don't have a tagline to send you away with, but I think you're on the right track in terms of um,
The other one that comes to mind is definitely sustainability, which has a lot of baggage,
yeah,
and resilience, which
yeah,
makes it more personal.
yeah. Resilience is funny. I mean, we're starting to see, you can hardly turn the news on nowadays without a politician, blah, 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 resilience, blah, blah, blah. We're so resilient. It's like, the violins playing in the background. And they don't even know what they're talking about. They're just, it's a buzz line, it's become like a greenwash, have using those words. But yeah.
Is there a chance that this slide can be put up on our town website? I didn't bring a phone, so. I mean,
Definitely. The Ecology Board has a Facebook page. And then also we have a link to our site on the town website. So we can probably put it in both spots. And if it's on the town website, then it's much easier to reference.
And I was going to say in the beginning, and I didn't, and maybe I should say now. I mean, earlier I had the Ecological Advisory Board logo on there, and I meant, oops, okay, I am not speaking on behalf of the town, and I'm not speaking even on behalf of the Ecological Advisory Board. I'm speaking on behalf of moi. And so, but with that said, there, yeah, you're absolutely welcome to have it. Yeah.
I just had a question that kind of piggybacks off the first questions on that you started there. My question is about the same topic, and this response to climate deniers that they're just acting on beliefs, whereas we have data and they're not being rational. And I feel like there's a tension between that approach or perspective and concepts related to collaborative knowledge building
Mhm.
and acceptance and integrating, in fact, belief-based knowledge systems and
Yes.
faith-based, spiritual, intuitive-based knowledge building systems, and doing so in a respectful and intentional way. I guess I just wonder if, as was asked earlier, there's not better language.
Well, so here's my suggestion, all right, or the way, because I deal with, students in a classroom is like a microcosm of society. You've got a representation of almost everything there. Okay, and I'm constantly challenged to reframe and readdress and be able to, truly, genuinely be respectful of all perspectives without surrendering my own. All right. And what I would say is that absolutely invite you to bring your best communication skills you could imagine and to maybe even consider bolstering those if you have an opportunity, interpersonal communication. But probably one of the most powerful ways of sparking dialogue and communication is to remain curious, to ask questions. Oh, so what I hear you saying is, so you mean this and this and this and that and that. So you're really showing interest. You're listening. You're not just saying, "Oh, that's crazy," or you're digging in and without surrendering your position, you're truly trying to understand this perspective. How do I get in their shoes? So if I'm understanding, you're saying that because of this and then you get curious and say, well, I'm wondering if you might be open to another perspective, or what would it be like if that part of that wasn't the way it was? Could you imagine another scenario? Staying with questions, that's one, and another, the proverbial I statements. Well, what I hear you saying is instead of what you said was wrong, what I hear you saying is very different from my understanding. Now, I'm taking ownership of everything there. I'm not projecting anything. So all those kind of skills will come to play. It may still be challenging, it probably will be, but yeah, I think that's where the work is, frankly. I think that really is. And I would say to go a step further, it really, at least in my view, is not about changing everybody's perspective. We need to grow the children from a young age with the knowledge and the understanding and a new generation of perception and understanding. That's where the hope lies in the future. The notion that we're somehow going to have a conversion and everybody's going to have a big aha moment and then we're going to, I don't think that's realistic. And that might be a couple of generations time. So, yeah.
Yeah, another question there. Great.
This may not be directly relevant, but I wonder if you have any comments about the Colorado River Compact negotiations, which look as though they're headed toward lawsuits that would inevitably cost billions of dollars in the last 15 years. What happens to resilience given the quandary that gives most of Colorado
Well,
to face and
all I could say is it's a good example of human behavior, squabbling over resources, frankly. To think that, the Colorado River, named Colorado, and, we're feeding everybody all the way down the line and everybody's wanting to take, I don't have an answer to it. I think it's just a really good example of the kind of human behavior that we're kind of faced with dealing with. What is the solution? Rain. Yeah, sorry, I don't have much more to, it's a conundrum, it really is. Yeah,
The ecology board started kind of around our river and the rebuild and creating awareness around ecosystems. And since then to where we are today, in a sense, I realized that these conversations are slower moving.
yeah,
They
Yeah.
take time.
They
and
do.
You've got to be incredibly patient.
yeah,
And as the ecology advisory board, we just try to keep things in the forefront of our town board on the
Yeah.
ecological topic.
Yeah.
And there's all these other arts and humanities and councils are all doing their own work, which is good for awareness. And so I think there's always a need for an ecological awareness in our community. Because our community's economy is so tied
yeah.
to the beauty that we have around here. So
It's just general understanding that it becomes indirect toward the issues. But another thing you said, Steve, which is I believe is important around the interpersonal communication aspect, is when things do get tense and things are, on edge, slow it down. Slow down. Just you've noticed whenever we get upset, our breathing gets erratic or we lose attention. Pay attention to your breathing. Be centered. Just pause and just slow it down and listen and then reflect. And good communication is reflecting, and that is, I want to be really clear that what's coming at me is what I'm hearing. So I reframe it and I send it back and say, oh, so what I hear you saying is that right? Am I on track? And what am I doing? I'm communicating to this person that I'm listening. And I'm just learning gaining incremental trust. And those kind of steps could, again, slow it down. a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions? There we go. Good.
Well, I just want to mention that we also have a workshop on Tuesday at 6:30 here, composting workshop. Boulder County is going to do a hands-on demonstration. Wednesday, 6:30 at the library. There's going to be a movie called 2040, and it investigates some future, well, some currently new technologies to try to improve, reduce our carbon footprint and some things that are happening all over the planet. On Thursday night, we're having a presentation here, 6:30, making sense of heat pumps and home electrification. And then on Saturday, there's going to be an expo at Bone Park all day long, starting in the morning with a river cleanup and tree planting. And in the afternoon, organizations coming to help the whole community get more familiar with what they can do towards making the environment a better place for all of us. So
Awesome.
this was part of the effort.
Yeah,
We
no, that's
appreciate
great.
you coming.
Yeah.
Definitely comes.
And this is the last week of the semester and I'm going to be in grading zone all week long. So unfortunately, I won't be able to participate in much, but
We have one seat open on the Ecology Advisory Board. If anybody's interested in just attending and seeing what we do, I can come up to me and I can tell you about it, or Tegan. Yeah.
There will be 3.
Okay.
I, as chair, just a quick announcement, I have decided to take a PhD opportunity down at the University of Arizona, pursuing history around the Colorado River. And, I will be needing to step down from my position as chair.
Understood.
Then, fair game. I'm here for it. So.
And there are 2 openings on the Sustainable Leaders.
Good, yeah.
and what night is it meeting?
Yeah.
What night are you meeting, guys? What night do you meet? What?
It is the second